While playing Truth or Dare, my boyfriend Randolph kissed his ex-girlfriend passionately for 3 minutes to save her from a penalty. When I found out, I caused a scene, furious. Randolph stayed silent for a long time before speaking coldly. "Are you done crying?" Then, he drove his ex home. I squatted in the rain, watching couples huddle under their umbrellas. From that moment, I never messaged Randolph again. 3 months later, I bought a men's watch at an auction. Randolph heard about it and chuckled softly. "Fine, in 3 days, I'll go and coax her back myself. She needs an out, after all." His friends sent me messages congratulating me on mastering Randolph completely. I ignored all of them and posted a single update on Facebook: married. The day Randolph kissed his ex was my birthday. He had promised to take me to a villa to watch fireworks that evening. I had dressed up carefully, choosing a red short dress, even though it was nearing autumn. As I stood shivering in the chilly air downstairs, Randolph finally arrived. A sleek black Maybach pulled up discreetly in front of the gate. Avoiding my mother's teasing gaze, I quickly got into the car. Once inside, I slipped my hand into the pocket of Randolph's coat. Perhaps feeling it was inappropriate, he glanced at the driver, frowned slightly, and removed my hand. The car was heading toward the airport. Halfway there, Randolph's phone rang. I saw the name Ashley on the screen and felt annoyed, refusing to let him answer. Ever since she returned from abroad, she had been intruding on every moment I had alone with Randolph. The three of us together always felt out of place. But Randolph didn't mind and even accused me of being overly sensitive whenever I complained. He said I couldn't accept someone who had been his close friend since childhood. This time was no exception. Randolph shook off the hand I had placed on his wrist and answered the call. On the other end, Ashley's voice came through, trembling with sobs. "Randolph, I'm at Champs Club." Seeing Randolph's expression, my heart sank. Though her voice was fragmented, I understood enough. Ashley had lost at Truth or Dare and needed to kiss a man for 3 minutes. Otherwise, she'd face some kind of punishment. She didn't explain the punishment, only repeated that she didn't want it. Randolph agreed immediately, "I'll be right there." After hanging up, he lowered his gaze and told the driver to take me home before heading to the club. Naturally, I refused. "If you go, will you kiss her again?" "Randolph, I don't want a tainted man. And don't forget, today is my birthday." That was my bottom line. Randolph pinched my cheek, his eyes darkening. "I won't. They'll show me some respect. Don't worry, I'll be back soon. Be good, Stacy." Not long after I returned home, I received a video. In a dimly lit private room, Ashley was sitting on Randolph's lap, kissing him passionately. When she leaned in, Randolph didn't pull away. His lips even curled slightly into a smile. Even if Ashley initiated, the scene was overly intimate. The people around them kept cheering. Tears streamed down my face immediately. I called Randolph right away. When he didn't answer, I kept calling. On the third attempt, he finally picked up. "Randolph, let's break up," I said. It hurt so much to say those words. Memories of our 3 years together flashed through my mind. Randolph was naturally cold toward others, carrying an innate arrogance due to his privileged background. Yet with me, he had always been attentive. Until Ashley came back. Tears fell as I cried, recounting everything that had changed since Ashley's return. On Valentine's Day, he took me to the movies, but during the scary scenes, he turned to cover Ashley's eyes instead of mine, even though I was his girlfriend. Randolph never liked amusement parks, no matter how many times I begged him to go. Yet, on his birthday, when I went to celebrate with him at his villa, he arrived with 2 bags of cartoon plushies. I found out later that Ashley had taken him to an amusement park that afternoon. I poured out my grievances until my throat was hoarse. Randolph remained silent the entire time. Finally, when my sobbing subsided, he spoke coldly. "Are you done crying?" His tone carried a hint of impatience, like a bucket of cold water poured over me. It made me realize how ridiculous I looked. Even as I cried over his ambiguity with Ashley, I had foolishly hoped he'd comfort me like he used to. But his words shattered that illusion. I suddenly felt it was pointless. "Yes," I replied softly and said nothing more. He hung up the call. An hour later, I received an anonymous photo. It showed Randolph carrying Ashley into a car. Her hand rested on the pocket of Randolph's coat. This time, he didn't push it away. I crouched down, closed my eyes, and let tears fall on my hands. After a long while, I stood up, went to the bathroom, and washed my face. I gathered myself and told my parents about the breakup. I also shared everything that had happened. They were furious and comforted me, full of love and concern. Looking at them, I felt relieved. I was grateful I had grown up surrounded by love, incapable of clinging to a man who didn't love me. Maybe I couldn't let go just yet, but I knew it would happen sooner than I thought. Randolph dropped Ashley off at her home and left shortly after. Before he left, Ashley, blushing, asked if he wanted to stay. After everything that had just happened, the atmosphere between them was charged with a certain adult tension. Randolph knew what she meant. But a cold breeze blew through, dispelling that tension. He thought about Stacy's earlier cries and shook his head. No. Ashley smiled. Let me guess, you're off to coax your little girlfriend now? Randolph, the way you indulge her, don't be surprised when she has you wrapped around her finger. You'll probably face countless breakups in the future. Randolph frowned slightly, unsure what he wanted. The idea of coaxing Stacy faded from his mind. He bid Ashley a simple goodbye and left. In the car, he stared at his chat history with Stacy. Seeing no new messages, he felt inexplicably irritable. At the club, news traveled fast in their circle. As soon as Randolph walked in, a few friends started teasing him. It's tough dealing with beauties, huh? You've got the stunning Stacy and your childhood sweetheart, Ashley. Why do you still look so sour? Probably because Stacy's already dumped him, huh? Randolph sat on the couch, crossing his long legs, and shot them a sharp look. Since when did your tongues get so long? The group fell silent, exchanging glances. Judging by your temper, we must have hit a nerve, huh? Come on, kissing Ashley while still with Stacy? Sure, it's nothing unusual in our circle, but it's not exactly classy. Aren't you afraid this time Stacy might really leave you? Randolph picked up his wine glass and took a sip. No. She's been talking about breaking up too often lately. It's time to cool things off with her. The others chuckled. True. 3 days later. My mom set me up on a blind date. Before I could even protest, she dressed me in a cream-colored Chanel short dress. Just go and meet him. He's already waiting. If you don't go today, how am I supposed to explain it to them? Left with no choice, I agreed. But I planned to make it clear once I got there. After all, Randolph and I had just ended things. It wasn't that I couldn't let go, I just wasn't ready for a new relationship. When I arrived at the top-floor private dining room at the address my mom gave me, I was surprised to see a man in a white sweatshirt sitting there. His youthful face radiated energy, looking no older than 22 or 23, like he had just graduated from college. More importantly, he seemed familiar. The moment he saw me, his eyes lit up slightly. Stacy. I suddenly remembered, he was Tyler, the son of my mom's best friend, Verna. Back when I was in college, he had stayed at my house for a few days. It was during summer vacation, and at 18, he had been dumped at my house by his mom because of his terrible grades. My mom told me he was the youngest in their family, a notorious troublemaker. The first time I saw him, he wore a black ear stud and had a rebellious attitude. He was followed by a group of friends. When someone teased him about being kicked out of his house, he raised an eyebrow and said, "Scram." At the time, I was 20 and still in college. Standing on the second-floor balcony, I decided to keep my distance from him. But his striking face was impossible to forget. Now, seeing him again, he seemed completely different, far less defiant. Tyler? He seemed a little surprised that I remembered his name. His eyes brightened. It's me. I couldn't believe my mom would set me up with someone so young, and someone I knew. What was she thinking? After sitting down, the waiter quickly brought out dishes, all my favorites. I wanted to reject him outright, but it felt too awkward to say it directly. After a long silence, I finally looked at him and said awkwardly, "You're too young. Isn't it too soon for you to be on a blind date?" His narrow eyes locked onto mine. I was the one who asked my mom to talk to your mom about this. And I'm not too young at all. His features were delicate, with a sharp jawline and a tightly held poise. Even in a loose sweatshirt, the lean muscles underneath were evident. His intense gaze was fixed on my face, carrying a clear message. I turned away and told him about my recent breakup with Randolph. He seemed to clench his jaw for a moment but then looked at me calmly. That's just your past. It doesn't matter. You're single now, aren't you? I've liked you for a long time. I was stunned but didn't know how to respond. During the meal, Tyler barely ate, instead busying himself peeling shrimp and crab for me. I felt embarrassed. You don't have to. It's too much trouble for you. He glanced at me, a hint of grievance and disappointment in his eyes. It's fine. Even if you don't like me, I like you. I awkwardly looked down, not knowing what to say. When we were leaving, he suddenly pinned me against the door. Half squinting, his gaze bore into mine before he smiled faintly. What's wrong? He reached out and gently wiped my lips. Nothing. Just a smudge. He was so tall that I had to tilt my head up to look at him, catching a glimpse of his rounded Adam's apple. Fortunately, he soon let go, politely offering to take me home. Before I could refuse, he had already ushered me into his car. Tyler drove a black Jeep. When we arrived at my building, he got out first to open the passenger door for me. But I struggled to unbuckle my seatbelt. He leaned over, confused, to help me. The cool scent of amber and musk enveloped me as he leaned closer. When the seatbelt finally clicked open, I instinctively tried to get up, only to accidentally bump my chest into his face. Flustered, I turned red with embarrassment and quickly pushed him away, trying to jump out of the car. But I miscalculated and fell straight out, landing on top of him. A chorus of gasps erupted around us. Instinctively, I turned my face away, only to find myself kissing Tyler's lips. More gasps followed. I turned my head and saw my mom standing with an elegant woman nearby. Isn't this progressing a bit too fast? Young people these days. I quickly scrambled to my feet while Tyler's ears turned crimson. He called out to the woman beside my mom, "Mom." Perhaps to defuse the situation, his mom spoke up first. So, does this mean the blind date was a success? Are you two officially dating now? I wanted to explain, but Tyler had already nodded. Turning to him, I saw him whisper softly. That was my first kiss. Everyone was waiting for my answer. Faced with their expectant gazes, I could only nod. There was no way to explain my way out of this, falling on him and kissing him in front of his mom. When I got home, Tyler sent me a message. If you're not interested, don't feel pressured. I'm fine. His thoughtfulness made me feel even guiltier. But after thinking it over, I realized I had nothing to lose. He was handsome, and we already knew each other well. Why not give it a try? And so, Tyler and I began our relationship. He often came to pick me up, taking me to amusement parks, private hot springs, horseback riding, archery, and surfing, always full of energy. During movies, his eyes stayed on me the whole time, obedient and endearing like a little puppy. Except, of course, he was younger than me. Whenever I brought this up, my mom would wave it off. Being young is great. You'll see its benefits soon enough. On Tyler's birthday, he invited me to his party early. Realizing I had never given him a gift, I decided to attend an auction to pick out something special for him. I knew there would be an 8-figure watch up for bidding that night. Though Tyler's wealthy uncle treated him like his own son, I still wanted to give him something meaningful. To my surprise, one of Randolph's friends, Wendell, also had his eye on the watch. At first, he didn't notice me. After a few rounds of bidding, I raised the final bid. When no one else bid, I stood up to finalize the deal, only to see Wendell looking at me in shock. Stacy? What are you doing here? Did you bid on the watch? I nodded. Unlike Randolph's other friends, Wendell had always been more polite to me, though we weren't particularly close. In a rush to leave for Tyler's birthday, I exchanged quick pleasantries before heading out. Tyler's party was held at the Champs Club, the city's largest and most private venue. I went home first to change out of my business suit and white shirt, swapping them for a pink bodycon dress. The hemline stopped above the knees with a fishtail design. I let my slightly curled hair down and took the chance to put on some makeup. Tyler offered to pick me up, but I declined. His friends were already there, and as the main host, it wouldn't be appropriate for him to leave. When I arrived at the door of the private room with my things in hand, I noticed the door to the room across was ajar, and Randolph's voice came from inside. Kyoto isn't a huge city, but it's not exactly small either. Running into people is not unusual. I overheard Wendell inside, saying, "Guess who I saw this afternoon?" Randolph was seated in the center, and I could clearly see his expression. "Who?" Wendell chuckled. "Stacy." Randolph's fingers paused slightly. "She was at the auction too. Bought a watch, actually. I liked that watch as well and even bid a few times, but guess what? Stacy lit the sky lanterns for it. A metaphor for paying a high price at an auction. It's a men's watch, probably meant for you." Randolph leaned back against the sofa, a faint smile on his lips. "She's really willing to spend. Pulling a stunt like that to lower her pride." Wendell took a sip of his drink. "She likes you so much. Are you really not planning to make up with her? It's been 3 months since Stacy contacted you." Randolph smirked. "It's just a Cold War. Judging by now, she's calmed down. She'll understand her place in the future. In 3 days, I'll coax her back. She's such a headstrong and willful person, I'll have to give her a way to back down gracefully." Randolph's meaning was obvious. Everyone exchanged glances, their gazes landing on Ashley. Even though she was sitting right next to Randolph, a look of embarrassment crossed her face. I didn't keep watching and pushed the door open to head into the room next door. Tyler's friends weren't what I expected. Despite being young, their personalities ranged from low-key to flashy, but they were all very respectful toward me, almost as if Tyler had given them a heads up. There were also quite a few girls who greeted me warmly and chatted about clothes and jewelry. Once we became familiar, a few of them blushed, huddling in a corner to hug me and bury their heads against my chest. Tyler's ears turned bright red as he pulled me up with a stern expression. "I haven't even hugged her yet. You guys are too much." The room immediately fell silent. One of his good friends scratched his ear. "Who was that talking just now?" Tyler shot him a cold look, and he instantly shut up. When the birthday party ended, I noticed Tyler's eyes hadn't left me the whole time. I decided to ask him, "Do you want a hug too?" His eyes lit up slightly. "Can I?" Before I could finish speaking, he wrapped an arm around my waist. A drunk man nearby let out a whistle, his gaze lingering on me. Tyler draped his coat over my shoulders and said, "Sis, wait here while I go get the car." I nodded, but he didn't return for a long time. When I reached the parking lot, I saw him pinning someone down, landing a few harsh punches with a fierce, wolf-like gaze. His fists were relentless. It wasn't until he heard my footsteps that he looked up, his expression shifting to that of a guilty puppy. Standing up, the man he had beaten quickly fled. Tyler looked slightly dejected, which amused me. I stepped forward and ruffled his dark, messy hair. "No one ever told you? Men shouldn't have their heads touched." I chuckled. "But little wolf dogs can, right?" He went to wash his hands before taking me to the car. The moment we got in, he captured my lips in a kiss. This is how a wolf dog behaves. Tyler and I had been dating for almost 3 months. Recently, my mom had been urging us to get married. Since we'd known each other since childhood and were familiar with each other's families, she wasn't worried about me having a bad life. Looking at Tyler reviewing documents for me, I thought, marriage wouldn't be so bad. He could manage the household, cook in the kitchen, review paperwork, and still be charming in the bedroom, a true all-rounder. I spoke up suddenly. "Tyler, let's get married." He froze, raising his head to look at me. Afraid I had startled him, I was about to explain when he lunged forward and pinned me onto the bed. "You're finally ready to give me a title, huh?" After nodding, Tyler's eyes glistened like a loyal puppy's. His tall nose and thin lips pressed against me, but even with my consent, he didn't dare go further. When he left, his posture was slightly hunched, and there was still a hint of blood on his fingertips. Watching his inwardly drawn shoulders, I had a sudden realization. Tyler and I successfully registered our marriage. On the way back, he carefully tucked our marriage certificate into his jacket pocket. When we arrived at his family home, his grandmother was overjoyed and gave me a nearly transparent white jade bracelet. The wedding arrangements were handed over to Tyler's aunt, who used to run a wedding planning business. Privately, his grandfather told me, if Tyler ever causes trouble, just let me know. Once we were back in our new home, Tyler immediately placed me on the small cabinet near the entryway, kissing me fervently. His body pressed between my legs, making me tense up. All I could do was cling to his neck. "Stacy," he murmured, his eyes slightly reddened, utterly irresistible. I finally understood what my mom meant by, "It's great to marry someone young." When I lay down on the couch, I finally reached out my hand. His eyes were slightly misty at the corners. He let out a muffled groan, and the moisture in his eyes deepened. In that moment, I finally understood the saying, "A man's tears are a woman's aphrodisiac." But soon, he turned the tables. By the end, it was me who was crying and begging for mercy. He savored every moment, tireless yet incredibly gentle. I couldn't resist and ended up sobbing as I pleaded with him. His fair skin gleamed, and his prominent Adam's apple bobbed lightly. What followed was a collision of raw, unrestrained passion. From that day on, Tyler seemed to have boundless energy. Thankfully, a call from work informed me that I had a project to focus on. I quickly gathered my things and headed to the office, feeling relieved. Even so, I often came home utterly exhausted. Tyler didn't push me again until one day, when I unexpectedly returned home early. From the bathroom, I heard his hoarse voice repeatedly calling my name. It was enough to make my ears burn. Instinctively, I stepped back, only to bump into the sofa chair with a loud thud. When Tyler came out, a loosely tied towel hung low around his waist. I swallowed hard. The next second, he smiled and scooped me up into the bathroom. Life with Tyler was sweet, and I had long since put the past behind me. Until a few days later, I received a call from an unknown number. It was Ashley. "Do you know why Randolph is so indulgent with me? Why he lets me kiss him and takes me to amusement parks? Stacy, you can't seriously be naive enough to think Randolph and I are just friends, can you?" As she spoke, her tone was calm, but a smug smile played on her lips. I glanced at the bitter, dark coffee in my cup and pushed it aside. All I could think about was Tyler's jealous face that morning. I hadn't wanted to come, but Tyler had nestled against my neck, whispering, "We need to face these things head-on and settle them. I know you're still carrying something in your heart. I just want to ease your burden, unlike that old man, who only watches you cry." I no longer had feelings for Randolph, but I still held a trace of resentment. It wasn't about him as a person, but rather about what he and Ashley had done to me, the debt they owed me. I had suspected before that there had been feelings between Randolph and Ashley, growing up together as they had. Teenage years often spark fleeting affections. Perhaps Ashley was his first love, or maybe, he simply lacked proper boundaries with her. Ashley seemed to anticipate my reaction. She smiled faintly and pulled a few photos out of her bag. "Because I'm his ex-girlfriend. I just didn't agree to make our relationship public back then. I craved freedom and insisted on studying abroad. Stacy, did you know? On the day I left, Randolph begged me to stay. So, you see, you can never compete with me. You're so much younger than him, you think he's steady and calm, but that's only because he's already poured all his passion into me. I just didn't expect him to truly fall for you." Her eyes glinted with a thin layer of anger. I sat there, looking at the photos of Randolph making gifts for her and celebrating her birthdays. The fog in my heart cleared entirely. Even the last trace of resentment I felt toward Randolph dissipated. "Well, you two really are a match made in heaven, a scumbag and a tramp. One who abandoned her lover to chase freedom, only to come back and meddle in his new relationship. And another who held someone in his heart while tangling with his current partner." Ashley laughed. "Stacy, don't say that. I was young back then and left Randolph for my own dreams. I'm just reclaiming what's mine, aren't I?" My phone vibrated. The screen displayed an unknown number, but the string of repeating digits told me exactly who it was. I answered the call, glancing at Ashley with a faint smile. "Don't worry. A second-hand man like him? I wouldn't even bother fighting over, let alone care about." Before I finished speaking, a raspy male voice came through the line. "Stacy, what did you just say?" I hung up, blocked the number, and grabbed my bag to leave. On my way out, I tipped the cup of iced coffee over Ashley. "I used to think, as fellow women, that while you were unpleasant, I didn't need to seek revenge on you. I never hated you, because ultimately, Randolph was the one most at fault. But you just had to come to me, parading your smugness, insisting on disgusting me with your words." Ashley shrieked. As I walked away, I heard her sobbing over the phone to Randolph. Randolph said, "Stacy, apologize to Ashley." I ignored it and drove back to the office. Seated in my office chair, I noticed a message from Tyler. "I think I added too much salt." He attached a photo. In it, he was shirtless, wearing a deep blue apron. His fair skin and well-defined muscles were on display as he stood at the stove. The live photo played when I clicked it, and his voice came through. "Grandma, can you stand closer? Otherwise, Stacy won't see how handsome I am." "Brat, I'm old and far-sighted, yet you still pull me in for pictures. I've got to win Stacy's heart. You never know if some shameless old man will regret losing her." I chuckled and replied to him. He immediately responded, like an eager puppy. When I exited the chat, I saw that many people had messaged me that day. But the content was all the same. "Stacy, I didn't expect Randolph to lower himself like this. Congratulations on finally getting him to bend, he's such a proud man to be pleading with you to come back." I thought of how they had celebrated Ashley's return in the group chat, deliberately placing her next to Randolph. The memory filled me with disdain. Then I remembered Tyler's earlier message and posted on Facebook. "Married. Don't bother." The post included a photo of our marriage certificate from the day we registered. After posting, my assistant came in with documents. I took them and put my phone aside. When Randolph heard Stacy's words, a wave of panic surged through him. "Second-hand man?" Her voice was so cold, so different from before. He wanted to say something, but Stacy had already hung up. When he called back, he discovered he'd been blocked. Away on a business trip, he felt an inexplicable unease, as if something essential had been completely stripped from his life. When his phone rang again, he answered it immediately. "Stacy." But the voice on the other end was Ashley's, choked with sobs. "Randolph, I invited Stacy for tea, hoping to persuade her to reconcile with you. But she poured iced coffee all over me." He barely registered her words, hearing only Stacy's name. For reasons he couldn't explain, he said, "Stacy, apologize to Ashley." The moment the words left his mouth, he regretted them. But it was always like this with him. After Ashley came back, others would instinctively pair him with Ashley. A seat in the corner was left for Stacy. Stacy refused, so Ashley stood up to give her his seat. The moment he left, tears began to fall. People nearby comforted Ashley, and even frowned, urging Stacy to apologize to him. Stacy's face turned awkward. She pressed her lips together and refused to comply. Frustrated, he simply sat down next to Ashley. That day, Stacy stormed off angrily. Someone asked him why he didn't go after her. He thought, "Stacy is so easy to coax, and we're on a mountainside. Even if she left, she wouldn't get far. At most, she'd just sulk by the entrance." But still, he grabbed his car keys and went out. Yet, Stacy was nowhere to be found. He suddenly thought of the way Stacy cried, always prideful. Even when she shed tears, they only hung delicately on her lashes, refusing to fall. Girls in their early 20s are always easy to console when it comes to love. He personally picked out a gift, bowed his head to apologize, and even gestured to a durian beside him. Stacy softened. She didn't make him kneel, but hugged his waist and said, "You can't do this again in the future." It was the same this time. He thought of the men's watch Stacy had bought for him and felt a bit at ease. But then he received a message from Wendell. "Randolph, have you seen Stacy's Facebook? She got married." The glaring screenshot landed in his view. The glass on his desk shattered onto the floor, pieces scattering everywhere. The sound of the shattering glass echoed the breaking in his chest. Working overtime until 10 p.m., I stepped out of the elevator and immediately noticed that familiar black Maybach parked outside the company. In the 3 months of no contact, Randolph seemed to have lost some weight. His jawline was sharper, exuding a colder, more severe air rather than his usual composure. A cigarette hung between his fingers, and he leaned against the car door, his eyes slightly bloodshot. He looked weary, making one wonder if he'd driven overnight from Harbor City. Though it was well past office hours, he still drew whispers from the young men and women passing by. I frowned, holding my off-white document bag as I stood at the entrance. The moment I stepped out, Randolph's gaze locked on me. When he saw I had no intention of approaching, he took a few steps forward. "Stacy." I instinctively raised my head and coldly nodded. "Mr. Randolph." His fingers twitched slightly, and he frowned. "Still upset?" "Stacy, it was my fault. I should have told you about my past with Ashley earlier. But you know, that's all it was, just the past. These 3 months without you have been torture. But I want you to understand, breaking up isn't something to take lightly. You're younger than me, and I need to teach you that. Come back with me? Let's make things right. As for what happened with Ashley this afternoon, I've already smoothed things over. You won't see her again, okay?" Randolph's arrogance ran deep in his bones. Even back then, I was the one who initiated most things in our relationship. I always rationalized it. He's 5 years older than me, his personality is reserved, so it's normal he's not as passionate. But now I realize his passion was simply never meant for me. I remembered that day when Randolph and Ashley returned from the amusement park. I was livid. Randolph and I had an argument. He looked at me, frowned, and turned to his study, leaving behind only. "Calm down." Perhaps out of guilt, Randolph had someone deliver an entire room full of plush toys to me the next day. But I was never fixated on those toys. What I wanted, he had always given to Ashley. Perhaps before that night, I might have been moved by his words. But now, looking at Randolph like this, only one thought came to mind. Affection that comes too late is as worthless as weeds. Anything, once missed at the right time, loses its meaning. I looked at him, my smile indifferent. "Mr. Randolph, that's all in the past. When old lovers meet again, I can't pretend we're still friends, nor can I dwell on what's past. For me, it's all just behind me now." He stared at me, as if conceding slightly, and said, "Let me drive you home." I glanced at the figure approaching in the distance, and curved my lips into a faint smile. Raising my eyes to look at Randolph, I spoke aloofly. "No need. My husband's here to pick me up." Randolph sighed. "Stacy, I don't believe you're married. We haven't even broken up, Stacy. Stop joking around." He still seemed certain that I loved him. But the panic in his eyes betrayed him, something even he didn't realize. It wasn't until Tyler wrapped an arm around my waist, his wrist adorned with a sleek watch, the one I'd given him for his birthday. "Sorry I'm late, babe. I went to get your favorite cake, but the line was crazy." Randolph's face turned pale. When Tyler led me away, Randolph instinctively stepped in front of us. Tyler raised an eyebrow as if noticing him for the first time. "Excuse us, old man." When Ashley returned, the others subconsciously paired him with her. A corner seat was left for Stacy. Stacy refused to sit there, so Ashley stood up and gave her his seat. The moment he left, he started crying. People nearby comforted Ashley, while someone frowned and told Stacy to apologize to him. Stacy looked uncomfortable, pressing her lips together and refusing to comply. That person simply sat down next to Ashley instead. Stacy left angrily that day. Someone asked why he didn't go after her. He thought, "Stacy is easy to pacify. Besides, we're on a mountainside. Even if she storms off, she can't go far. At most, she'd sulk at the entrance." Yet he still grabbed his car keys and went out to find her. But Stacy was nowhere to be seen. For some reason, he thought of her teary eyes. Stacy was always proud. When she cried, her tears would hang delicately on her lashes, stubbornly refusing to fall. Girls in their early 20s are often easy to appease when it comes to love. He personally chose a gift, apologized, and gestured toward a durian nearby. Stacy softened, sparing him from kneeling. Instead, she wrapped her arms around his waist and said, "Don't do this again." This time was no different. He thought of the men's watch Stacy had bought for him, feeling slightly reassured. But then a message from Wendell arrived. "Randolph, have you seen Stacy's Facebook? She got married." The blinding screenshot filled his vision. A glass cup fell from his desk, shattering into pieces on the floor. As the sound of breaking glass echoed, something inside him shattered too. After working overtime until 10 p.m., I stepped out of the elevator and saw that familiar black Maybach parked outside the company. In the 3 months we hadn't been in contact, Randolph seemed to have lost some weight. His jawline was sharper, his usual composure replaced by a trace of coldness. He was holding a cigarette between his fingers, leaning against the car door, his eyes faintly red. There was a weariness about him that made one wonder if he had driven all night from Harbor City to see me. Even though it was long past work hours, his presence still attracted murmurs from the young men and women passing by. I frowned, standing at the entrance, with my off-white document bag in hand. From the moment I appeared, Randolph's gaze locked onto me. Seeing that I had no intention of approaching him, he took a few steps forward. "Stacy," he called. I instinctively looked up, nodding coolly. "Mr. Randolph." His fingers twitched slightly, and he frowned. "Still upset?" "Stacy, that matter was my fault. I should have told you about my past with Ashley earlier. But I swear, it's all in the past. These 3 months you've been gone, I've thought about you every day. But I want you to know, breaking up isn't something to take lightly. You're younger than me, it's my responsibility to guide you. Come back with me. Let's start over. As for what happened this afternoon with Ashley, I've already taken care of it. You won't have to see her again, okay?" Randolph's pride was ingrained in him. Even back then, I was always the one to take the initiative in our relationship. I used to rationalize it, he's 5 years older, reserved by nature. Not being overly passionate was normal. But his passion, it was never meant for me. I thought of the day Randolph and Ashley returned from the amusement park. I was furious. We fought. Randolph looked at me, frowned, and retreated to his study, leaving only a curt, "Calm down." Maybe out of guilt, Randolph sent an entire roomful of stuffed animals the next day. But I never cared about those toys. What I wanted was what he had given to Ashley. Before that night, perhaps I would have been moved by his words. But now, looking at Randolph, I could only think of one thing. Late affection is worthless. Anything, no matter how precious, loses its meaning when the moment has passed. I smiled faintly at him. "Mr. Randolph, that's all in the past. Meeting an ex again, I couldn't pretend to be friends after breaking up, nor could I dwell on the past. To me, it was just history." He looked at me, a trace of compromise in his eyes. "Let me drive you home." I saw a figure approaching from the opposite side and curled my lips into a slight smile. Looking up at Randolph, I said distantly, "No need. My husband is here to pick me up." Randolph sighed. "Stacy, I don't believe you're married. We haven't even broken up, Stacy. Stop messing around." He still seemed certain I loved him. But the panic in his eyes betrayed him, though he hadn't realized it himself. Until Tyler wrapped an arm around my waist, a sleek watch on his wrist, the one I had given him for his birthday. "Sorry, babe, I'm late," Tyler said. "I stopped to get your favorite cake." The line was crazy. Randolph's face turned pale. As Tyler led me away, Randolph instinctively stepped in front of us. Tyler raised an eyebrow as if just noticing him. "Excuse us, old man." I glanced at Tyler. Randolph was only 29, not quite old enough to be called old man. But Tyler's mischievous grin, bold and unapologetic, carried a hint of provocation that made people want to hit him. Randolph seemed to recognize Tyler. He froze momentarily, then frowned deeply. "You and him." Tyler pulled out a marriage certificate and smiled as he finished the sentence. "Just got officially married." Randolph's face darkened completely. His gaze fell on me, disbelief filling his reddened eyes. "We haven't broken up. We were just cooling off. Even if you're angry, you can't just marry someone randomly. Stacy, he's younger than you. You're not compatible." Tyler was furious. "I said we're compatible, so we are. Who the hell are you to say otherwise? We're the perfect match." 3 months. You think a cooling off period lasts that long? Haven't you heard of the 3-day rule? No contact for 3 days equals a breakup. Besides, Stacy already told you she was done with you. Then, as if it wasn't enough, Tyler added threateningly. "Old man, do yourself a favor and move on." Back in the car, Tyler's narrow eyes burned with anger. Once the door was shut, he wrapped his arms around my waist like a wounded puppy. "Baby, don't listen to him. We're perfect together. Perfect in every way, even in bed. My face flushed as I slapped my hand over his mouth. What I didn't expect was that Tyler would take me to his family's estate that very night. At dinner, he kept sighing dramatically. The others stayed silent, clearly used to his antics, though their eyes were filled with disdain. Finally, his grandmother spoke up. "What's wrong with you?" Tyler had been waiting for this. Without hesitation, he began recounting how Randolph had tried to steal his wife, painting Randolph as a homewrecker trying to tear apart a loving couple. He even added, "If I lose my wife, I won't go on living." His grandmother was outraged. "How dare he? Trying to take my granddaughter-in-law? Unacceptable. This must be dealt with." I finally understood why everyone said you should never cross Tyler. He was a troublemaker, through and through. As the family's only grandchild, he was utterly spoiled. I thought his grandmother was just venting, but to my surprise, Tyler's two uncles nodded in agreement. Even his father, though he glared coldly at Tyler, seemed resigned to the situation. The family was strict, even their jujube trees stood upright. They wouldn't act recklessly, but it was clear Randolph's family privileges had just been revoked. Randolph didn't remember how he got home. The next thing he knew, his car had crashed into a bridge railing. He called his assistant to handle the aftermath. The driver took him to a private hospital. Somehow, a crowd of people heard about the incident and gathered at the hospital to see him. His head had been grazed by shards of broken glass. After treatment, it was bandaged up. Thankfully, it wasn't anything serious. Only then did the group finally breathe a sigh of relief. Wendell was the first to speak. "Randolph, weren't you going to meet Miss Stacy? How did you end up in a car accident? Didn't I already tell you? That photo online was probably just to provoke you. Why were you speeding?" Randolph was reminded of that glaringly offensive photo again. He and Stacy, they were only in the middle of a Cold War. He thought that by giving her the silent treatment for a while, she would realize her mistakes and stop threatening to break up at every turn. But the truth was, during that time, Stacy had already moved on with her life. On the day Stacy first mentioned breaking up, Randolph had been escorting a drunken Ashley out of a bar. He remembered considering, even for a brief moment, what his lack of resistance to Ashley's advances might mean to Stacy. And then, as he was leaving, he heard Stacy say, "I don't want a man who's been sullied." So when he got Stacy's call later, he hesitated for a moment but ultimately answered it. On the other end, Stacy had clearly already heard about everything. Randolph's first instinct was to find out who had fed her the news. Stacy was crying, heartbroken, devastated. He had never heard her cry like that before. The first time Randolph met Stacy, she was wearing a bold red strapless gown. She was strikingly beautiful, radiating an air of confidence and delicacy. She was surrounded by a group of young men, frowning slightly as if she had grown used to their attention. Someone nearby brought up her family background, marveling at her looks. Watching her with her proud, spoiled demeanor, Randolph felt his heart stir, just a little. Later, as the party ended, Stacy found herself accosted by a drunken man. Randolph stepped forward and had the man thrown out. He noticed the faint redness on Stacy's ears. Even with their 5-year age gap, he couldn't stop himself from falling for her. At that time, Ashley had already left him. Randolph got together with Stacy, though initially unsure how long their relationship would last. 3 years passed, and he was still by her side. But his feelings grew muddled when Ashley returned. Haunted by the remnants of their shared history, he allowed Ashley back into his life as a friend. Stacy had argued with him about this more than once, but he only found it tiresome. The night Stacy said she wanted to break up, Randolph dismissed it as a fleeting outburst. Even when she stopped texting him afterward, he thought it was just part of the Cold War. Randolph's eyes turned red. The people around exchanged glances, but avoided his gaze. They quickly found excuses to leave. Only Wendell stayed to look after him. Although Randolph still had control of the company, his father had multiple illegitimate children, so news of the car accident wouldn't spread. She got married. Randolph didn't know why he said it out loud. He had always been composed, wary of emotional vulnerability, especially in business. Sharing something like this? It wasn't like him. Wendell was taken aback. She really got married? To who? Looking at Randolph's current state, Wendell thought to himself, if it comes to it, we can always win her back. Randolph stared out the window. Tyler. Wendell fell silent. He realized that this was the end for Randolph and Stacy. But seeing Randolph like this, he didn't have the heart to say it. After some time, Wendell left to buy food. When the door closed, Randolph pulled out his phone and sent a message to Stacy. But a notification popped up, "You are no longer friends with this user." Stacy had already deleted him. Which was why he couldn't see her Facebook anymore. If he had sent her a message earlier, if he had seen things earlier, would it have been different? Randolph couldn't hold back any longer. He covered his face and let the tears fall. He remembered the day Stacy had cried over the phone. He had only felt irritated. When her sobs turned hoarse, he had snapped, "Are you done yet?" It took her a long time to respond, softly. From that moment, there was no future left for them. On the day of my wedding to Tyler, many people came. Oddly enough, not that many from our circle showed up, but there were still quite a few guests. After all, our connections were complicated. I didn't expect Randolph to come. He looked thinner than before. I heard that Ashley had gone abroad again, though I wasn't sure why. Her family had gone bankrupt years ago, and it was only Randolph's influence that kept others polite toward her. Not long ago, I had even seen Ashley being ridiculed by some people in our social circle for stealing an international student's boyfriend abroad. Compared to last time, Randolph looked even more worn out now. When Tyler stepped onto the stage first, he couldn't help feeling uneasy. "Don't you dare ditch me at the altar," he joked nervously. His close friends burst out laughing. "Relax, man. Go on in. We'll keep an eye on her for you, all right?" Even as Tyler walked in, he couldn't stop himself from glancing back repeatedly. A few minutes later, the doors to the banquet hall opened, and I entered. Tyler grinned from ear to ear. "My wife is stunning." His aunts and the older relatives chuckled warmly at his words. As the music played, I made my way toward Tyler. When I finally stood in front of him, he looked at me, and his gaze lingered. Suddenly, tears the size of beans rolled down his cheeks. He quickly covered his eyes with his hand, bowing his head so I wouldn't see. In the audience, his aunts and even his grandmother were wiping their eyes. I stepped closer and gently hugged him. My dad, however, shook his head with a mix of amusement and disbelief. "Kid, why are you crying? I'm the one giving away my precious daughter, and even I didn't shed a tear." Tyler wiped his eyes and lifted his head, taking my hand from my father's trembling fingertips. His own hand shook as he held mine. When it came time to exchange rings, he took a deep breath to steady himself and managed to slip it on my finger. With that, the ceremony concluded. As we descended from the stage, I scanned the crowd and caught a glimpse of Randolph sitting in the far corner. His eyes were red too. After the wedding, during the toast, Randolph was nowhere to be found. He had already left. The atmosphere around us was filled with the clinking of glasses and laughter. These kinds of banquets had no clear end in sight, so Tyler and I decided to slip away with our best man and maid of honor and head to our new home. Tyler went to get the car while I waited on the side. That was when I overheard a conversation from the familiar Maybach parked nearby. Inside, Randolph's voice was low and gravelly as he spoke to Wendell. "I sent Ashley away because she crossed the line by looking for Stacy. Sometimes, I wonder, if I hadn't been with Ashley, would I have been the one standing in front of her today? She looked beautiful today, but she's not mine anymore." I didn't stay to listen further. Quietly, I got into Tyler's car. He drove with a permanent smile on his face. I thought back to that morning when he came to pick me up from my house, dressed in a crisp white suit. His dark hair fell messily over his forehead, and his face radiated pure joy. He had charged into the room and scooped me into his arms like a victorious general returning from battle. Cheers erupted around us. The past is the past. When we arrived at the villa, Tyler didn't waste any time. By nightfall, he had sent everyone away in a hurry and practically dragged me into the bedroom. His white dress shirt fell to the floor. His toned back, smooth skin, and the sharp contrast of broad shoulders and a narrow waist came into view. Even without seeing his face, his youthful energy was undeniable. He took my hand and pressed it to his abs. Warm lips found mine. In the quiet night, the faint sounds of his restrained sighs seemed to harmonize with the moonlight outside. His love was always genuine, always fervent. Before drifting into sleep, a phrase I once read came to mind. May the next time we cry, it be from happiness. Extra, Tyler's POV. The first time he met Stacy was in the courtyard of her family's villa. After chasing everyone else away, he glanced up and saw her lounging on the balcony in a pair of shorts and a tank top. Her slender waist, long legs, and flowing hair were captivating. Perhaps sensing his gaze, Stacy quickly retreated inside. At the time, Tyler had planned to stay in a hotel for a few days. After all, he was an adult now. But the memory of her delicate face changed his mind. It seemed Stacy was afraid of him. Ever since he moved in, she had stopped coming downstairs for meals. Even the housekeeper delivering food upstairs would mutter about how strange it was that Stacy suddenly refused to eat with the family. On his last night there, he returned home late. The moment he stepped inside, he saw Stacy in the kitchen, drinking water. She seemed dazed, mistaking him for someone else. After setting down her glass, she leaned into him, wrapping her arms around his waist. She mumbled something he couldn't make out, but the faint scent of her lingered in his nose as his heart raced wildly. The next time he heard about Stacy, it was through a conversation between his mom and Stacy's mom. They were talking about Stacy's new boyfriend. Tyler pressed his lips into a thin line, saying nothing, though jealousy burned fiercely inside him. But Stacy was in college, and he forced himself to bury his feelings. Even so, during summer breaks, he'd find excuses to visit her home a few times, confirming one thing: Stacy was afraid of him. Eventually, Tyler had someone investigate Randolph. Upon learning about Randolph's involvement with Stacy, he immediately confessed his feelings for her to his mom. He didn't stop there, insisting she arrange a blind date between him and Stacy. Naturally, his mom refused. But Tyler said, "If I can't marry Stacy, I won't get married in this lifetime." "Suit yourself," she snapped. Glancing at the crowd eavesdropping in the living room, Tyler chuckled. "If I don't get married, I'll just become a homewrecker." In the end, he got his wish and went on the blind date with Stacy. There was no way his family would allow him to take a path of disgrace. Unexpectedly, Stacy kissed him. Everything else fell into place after that. He pretended to be obedient, and Stacy quickly let her guard down and accepted him. When he beat up a drunk man one night, Tyler thought Stacy might leave him. For a moment, he was at a loss. But Stacy only ruffled his hair. The white moonlight of his youth shone on him once more that summer when he was 18. From then on, Stacy and Tyler had a future together. The end.